In this episode of Project Grip S14, I'm replacing the cracked subframe we found at the alignment shop. So it's either gonna go one of two ways, quick and easy, or a lot of rusted bolts and a lot of headaches. Let's see how this turns out. That's right, this is the noisiest jack ever. It's also Harbor Freight. And I've already hit a snag. Normally when I'm jacking up the 240 and putting a jack stand underneath it, I would put it on the rear subframe because this whole area on the chassis rail here is so rusted that when you try to lower the car onto it, it just starts folding. So it looks like I might have to live on the edge, move this a little bit further back and see if it holds. Cross your fingers. This is sketchy already. Oh man. That is just crushing the chassis. Oh, this is not good. This is definitely not going to work out. Man, oh man. After a bit of trial and error, I've decided that this is the best spot for the jack stand. It's just in front of the subframe, away from the seam, but just to be safe, I added one more jack stand up front here on the seam. So I'm confident with this setup, we should be safe and this car's not gonna fall on me. And now, onto the actual removal process. But for those of you just tuning in, here's a quick look at that cracked subframe. Thankfully, the Tomei exhaust hasn't seen any salt yet, nor will it ever, so it came off with ease. She's tight but light. Next, I disconnected the drive shaft. This requires loosening the parking brake so then you can rotate the drive shaft, then tightening the parking brake up again, then crawling underneath and being able to crack those nuts loose so you can remove the drive shaft. The calipers come off in one easy swoop after the two bolts holding it in place are removed. I usually zip tie the caliper to the brake line and put the bolts back in so they don't get lost. Something that seems to happen way too often to me. Underneath the rotor, you'll find the parking brake assembly, which includes the parking brake cable. It takes a bit of fiddling to remove it without taking the whole assembly apart, but I think this is the fastest method, so I'll deal with a little bit of inconvenience. After that, the lower shock mounts need to be popped off and then the subframe is ready to be dropped down. I use a floor dolly to support the subframe, which then allows me to unbolt the four nuts holding it in place. Doing this solo is a bit of a balancing act, but as you can see, if you take it nice and slow and steady, the subframe will slide right out with very little fuss. Yeah, so the pine cone has been lodged in between the chassis and the subframe since I've owned this car. And now, I'm actually sad to kind of see it go. Well, that turned out to be much easier than I expected. Subframe's out. I'm actually not gonna tear any of it apart other than taking the diff out because I wanna reseal the cover. It's leaking a little bit. But otherwise, I don't wanna touch anything right now until I get the new subframe, so then I can just transfer stuff over without getting bolts mixed up or anything like that. I've gone ahead and purchased a used JDM rear subframe from an S14. It's super clean, but the bushings are still stock, and I'm looking for a little bit more performance out of them. So I'm upgrading to a set of white line suspensions bushings. These are polyurethane, much stiffer than stock, but they still have some good compliance. Whereas if you run, you know, full metal or the metal subframe collars that a lot of people do, you just get a lot of harshness and noise vibration. I'm trying to avoid that because it's a street car. So the white line bushings are the way to go, in my opinion. This subframe is off to Crichton Automotive, where those guys are gonna install the bushings for me because I don't have time to try to burn these out, press them out, and put the new ones in. And now we look at the reason why I took off this subframe. Check this crack out. Wow, that thing super rusted. You can understand why it broke where it did. But man, oh man, I can't believe that happens. Welcome to Canada. Welcome to the Rust Belt. I just received the JDM subframe back from Crichton Automotive. They did an awesome job installing the white line bushings. And once again, let me show you why I chose them. That's because they offer very little movement, but they still have a lot of compliance built into them because they're rubber isolated. And let me show you with the old ones, these guys obviously are gonna ride better, are gonna reduce noise and vibrations, but they have a ton of movement. So that's not ideal when you're looking for ultimate performance, because then the subframe's gonna flex in the back, and you definitely don't want that. Anyways, now what's left to do is take all the arms, axles, hubs, and the rear diff, transfer it over into the new JDM subframe here, and put it back on the car. And just when I thought I was getting close to finishing this job, I run into one hell of a setback. Oh, God. The rear differential cover that I have does not fit the JDM rear subframe that I've gone ahead and purchased. So now I've got to go source a rear JDM diff cover to make it work in here. It's not the end of the world, but it's just gonna set this project back even further. However, I'm still gonna mount everything up and put it in the car, and then I can put the differential in afterwards. All right, so the rear subframe is hung. All that's left to do is put the diff in, but that'll be on my own time. In the next episode, we're gonna be at the alignment shop, finally getting this thing dialed in perfectly, and then headed to the track to test this car out. Hopefully there's no further setbacks, because I'm dying to test this thing out before it gets cold and dreary. It is a little bit more tricky because it's got a drum brake set up inside of it, so I got to remove all that to remove it, and I'm just going to keep talking, because sometimes when you do these takes, you just keep going and going and going, and you don't know when to stop. I just got to shut up.